assuming we're starting. This is fantastic. Hello, and you're all very welcome tonight to this specific event, but more especially, you're very welcome tonight to Lyft's headquarters, our gracious host for the evening. Let's not try and trash the place. Not that anyone cares, but my name is Neil Walsh. I am a professor of organizational psychology at the University of San Francisco School of Management. And that's probably about the most you're going to hear from me from the night, apart from questions. The real reason we're here tonight, of course, is understanding. What we're interested in is culture. And much has been made of culture in the last few years, not just academically, but also occupationally and organizationally. And what we're hoping to happen tonight is a little bit of insight away from the abstract, from the theoretical, and start to look at culture as an experience of what it feels like, not just to keep the lights on and the doors open somewhere, but what keeps people coming back for more. What makes an organization distinct, what makes it experiential, and what distinguishes it from not just competitors, but from any other place so many other people could work. Tonight, through good fortune or bad, we've been joined by some great people, and I'd like to introduce you to them. First of all, some framing. Accounting is often given a very bad reputation, but without it, we wouldn't have Ron Storn, head of VP of People here at Lyft, who is in a former existence, a CPA at KPMG, which is a set of acronyms not a lot of people escape from, ever. But escape, Ron did, and started Targus Human Capital, which was a boutique recruiting firm which started, I suppose, a 20-year tone of recruiting at Google, at Facebook, and of course, now here. So Ron, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Michael D'Angelo, head of people at Pinterest, and Michael has had leadership roles at, correct me if I'm wrong, Microsoft, Merck, Allied Signal, which acted as an arena, I suppose, for all of your early successes. A stint as vice president of HR at PepsiCo, is that right? Yes. Presumably provided this caffeine-fueled imperative to bring him to head of people role at Google, as EMEA operation in Zurich, before settling, but possibly not calming down, I assume, into a role at Pinterest, where you've been for 2 years now. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Mike. And Claire Hughes Johnson, COO at Stripe, has come to us by way of experience in the very calm and tranquil waters of the Massachusetts political spectrum, before making a profound impact at a small local startup called Google here in the Valley. I have to look them up, where she's had VP roles across in Google Online Sales, Google Apps, most recently in Google self-driving cars, before bringing quantum levels of autonomy to the COO role at Stripe. Claire, thank you so much for joining us this evening. You know you've hit the right tone if they're suitably embarrassed, I've always found. Right, let's get into this, because the truth is much has been made of culture, probably too much in some spectrums, namely academia. But the reality is we talk about culture in abstracts, and what we're interested in hearing is behaviory. What does culture look like? And I ask you all, could you name one specific behavior that would encompass what culture is at your respective organizations? Do I have to give up my mic? Okay,
No.
right.
Do
you want to start, please? Work away.
Sure. I mean, I think it's hard to just pinpoint one behavior, but I think for Lyft, I would probably characterize it as like scrappy, friendly, and social. Scrappy means that, we're not going to let anything impede our progress. Think about it from what we do from a regulatory standpoint. Maybe before I get into that, why don't I ask this question? How many people took a Lyft here to the event? Okay. And how many people took it for the first time? A few. Okay. So it's actually pretty good. But I mean, as far as
acquisition goal achieved.
Exactly.
You can all go home now. We're done for the evening.
We're done. So when I started 2 years ago, we were in 6 cities, and now we're in 65 plus cities. And a lot of that was a regulatory nightmare. And we were always told you can't start here, you have to conform to certain regulations. So our whole mindset is how can we be creative? How can we be scrappy? And that behavior permeates all of the organizations here. And I think that's a great mindset to have for a startup, because startup is always trying to climb uphill to get to where we want to be. And I think having that mindset will help any company get to where you want to be.
Great, thank you.
I thought more of two specific behaviors. So one of them is at our headquarters, just actually a block away from here. Everyone pretty much at the same time every day has lunch together, and in a very warm, inviting kitchen. And we actively encourage and hope that people sit with very different people at lunch. So there's a lot of just come and sit down where there's a spot, because there's these long tables, and chat with who you're having lunch with. And I think the second is that we have a value of sort of doing whatever's necessary and really rolling up your sleeves, and it doesn't matter what your job is. And I think the best exemplification of that is actually when our receptionist, who greets guests on our sort of at our door, similar to here, takes a break or is on vacation, we all sign up in shifts to cover reception. And the person who usually signs up first and covers the most is our founder and CEO. So you will find him sitting at reception more often than he should be, in my opinion. But it's actually a great message, and it's very much what Stripe is about.
Great, thank you very much.
That's very cool. So I'm Michael from Pinterest. One of our key values is knit. And for us, knit is about working across disciplines to come up with a solution. But knit just is very pervasive for us in general. We're a very nice culture. So it gets in the way a couple of times if you want to. Another value we have is be authentic. So sometimes when you're nice, it's hard to be authentic in a way that you get the message across without diluting it. But for behavior, the way we build products is you have an engineer or several engineers, you have a product person, and you have a designer. And we are not a design company. We're not an engineering company. We're not a product company. We're all of those. So for us, that pervasiveness of knit is really important. And the way my people team works is we work across the functions. So anything we build has to have multiple functions building it with us, and that helps us with getting products out.
Okay, actually, while I have you, it seems that we're coming across topics consistently of values, and all three organizations are known in the public sphere of being deeply value-driven. Nobody trips and falls and ends up working at any of these three institutions by accident. How are your values connected to the culture? Is there a direct relationship between the values you espouse and indeed how it defines the culture?
Yeah, you would hope they're really tied,
okay.
Right? So the way we select is we do interviews that are behavioral based and anecdotal to check out, is this person a value fit?
Okay.
And we look for qualities that are things that reflect Pinterest. And those are much more important to us at this point than has someone done this exact gig.
Okay.
Because the long-term people who are going to be successful are the ones who really buy into what it's like to work at Pinterest and what it feels like when you come to work on Monday. So if your values are not lined up with that, it's not good for you, it's not good for the company. But I would say the thing that we've tried to get across really exceptionally well with new hires is this is the way you make decisions at Pinterest, here's how work gets done, and it's done according to our values.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, that's very accurate. Sure. Does anybody else want to handle that one? Values to culture?
Sure. I think culture is everything, and values ties into that. I think the experience that you have on the Lyft platform between drivers and passengers, we replicate that internally here for all of our team members. And we have 4 core values that really speak to this. One is be yourself, very similar to Pinterest, where it's who you are at home is who we want you to be here, because we feel like you're going to be very productive if you're your true self. We have dogs in our environment here, so we want to just create the environment that you're at home, that you can be free and creative, and you're gonna be more productive. Another one is create fearlessly. We want to empower every team member that if something is wrong, they should be empowered to fix it or ask someone who can handle it. Also, we want people to really question everything we do. Just because we've been doing something a certain way doesn't mean that's the right way of doing it. So we want people to really pull together and try to bring your experience to the table to move the company forward. The third value is uplift others. And basically, like the drivers uplift passengers and passengers uplift drivers on the platform. Internally here, similar to what Michael said, engineering, operations, marketing, all have to work together. We're only as good as the whole company being very collaborative and working seamlessly across all the different different functions. So it's very important for us to have that collaborative, uplifting mindset. And the last one is make it happen. We're prone to action, but as we scale and become larger, we have to be prone to thoughtful action. One of our internal sayings is effing participate, because we don't want people to sit back and wait. We want people to actually do things. And so all of this is thread through everything we do, our decision making, our actions, our reviews, and we even have those values on our staircase so people can see that as you walk through the halls and you think about what you're doing each day. Great,
thank you.
I would only add that Stripe when I joined, I explained to Patrick and John, our co-founders, that I think we needed to write down our values. So they were very clearly in the company, but they had not really been codified in any way. And that expression, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yep.
I feel like the values are like in the bloodstream of that thing that's eating the strategy. And if you don't really get them agreed, then it's very hard to put them in your interview process and your performance process, and just how do you set expectations and give feedback to each other. And writing them was really a group exercise with a lot of people who volunteered in the company. And what I've said to many people, if you're joining a company that's as young as some of these, and Stripe I think may be the youngest, but the values, like the culture of the company generally is a bit of a mirror on the founders and their value systems. So the mistake I think some companies make is writing down aspirational values, like this is what I'd like to be, versus being self-aware and being like, this is actually the way we are. And so a lot of our process was about writing down what was already true in the company, sort of the do whatever's necessary or be humble, represented by Patrick sitting at reception. That's real. That's just the way the company, at the end of our all hands meeting, we do it in our kitchen, everybody puts the chairs back, right, to where they were. There's no crew that's doing all the work, and I think there's a lot of that already in the company, and we just had to write it down. And we all came up with examples of behaviors that were already happening. And then we had maybe one or two values that were a little bit more aspirational, and I think that was just for us to set our bar on what we want to be. But it was a great process, and there's too many of them, and I'm not going to list them all, but I'm happy to share more if you're interested.
No, I think what's interesting to hear across all three is that there's a certain amount of practicality behind values and the experience of culture. The big guilt I would have as an academic is we talk about it in the abstraction. It's about an exercise in idealism, it's about projection and what you could be, what you should be, and often ignores the grim reality of often what you are, for good or for bad. And in looking at the way you've structured these, is there any relevance in asking the question, what formal or informal processes do you have to bring people into that culture? Because of course, new organizations, you're still figuring yourselves out. You're the Bambi trying to stand up on ice equivalent of, that might have been an outdated metaphor. Did that date me? I think it dated me. No, okay, good. But the reality is, how do you bring people on board, be it informally or formally, to what's essentially an evolving culture, something that's so new?
And it starts with day one, your onboarding. We have one of the founders usually give a story about how they connected and where their passion started, right? So it's really getting to have a sense of who they are and how they started building the company. I also speak at every orientation where we talk about all those core values I discussed, and it resonates with most people because they come from all companies that have certain values, but I think to Claire's point, I mean, some could be aspirational, but you have to really live it and stand behind it, and we try to do that. The other thing is we have company meetings in this space here every 2 weeks, and part of the process is we try to grill all of our new hires, make fun of them, and kind of bring them into the family. So I think that's a great way of showing our values. We also have an award called Employee of the Fortnight, and what that is someone who goes above and beyond their normal course of duties, and we align those to one of those core values, and they get this special recognition and award in front of all of the company. So it's really thoughtful, and it's really prescriptive on how we try to bring people along. I think a couple of other things is understanding that drivers and passengers, that's everything for us because that's our lifeline. And so we have inspirational stories about drivers and how they touch our passengers and vice versa, and that really talks to the mission and the value and the culture that we have here, and it gets people fired up. So things of that nature I think is very important. And one last thing I'm pointing out is we also give coffee cards to everyone who starts too. And what that encourages is to meet new people who you ordinarily wouldn't work with, but just kind of breeds that welcoming, collaborative, creative type of environment that we think makes someone successful from day one.
It sounds like acculturation is taken quite seriously. It's quite active.
Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Those are good. I like those. I'm going to steal some.
Sure.
That's what this is about.
Yeah,
it's about
right.
stealing each other's
Intellectual
work
theft.
and
That's why we're all here.
helping your company. So I think I mentioned before, we select for it first. We think it's really important when you interview, you should be bringing people in who match your culture as much as possible. And those people who don't, you should try to find ways that to make sure you don't bring them in. Because when you're growing super fast, the biggest way you can change a culture is by your last hiring year, right? So if you're doubling every year, whoever you hired that year, that is your culture. And if you're not careful, you bring people in who are going to change it dramatically. And if you have a strategy where you want to evolve it, that's fine. But if you have a strategy that says, our competitive advantage is our culture, we want to sort of cherish that going forward, then you make sure the people you bring line up, and if they don't, then you have other problems that occur. The second thing is we do an onboarding that's pretty heavily influenced by our leadership. So your first week, you have all of the leaders in the different functions come in and talk about culture. Ben, our CEO, comes in and he talks about how he founded the company, how it's grown over the years. He's super humble and he can't believe all the new hire classes, and he talks about where he came from and what he's trying to do with the service of Pinterest. So we try to ground everyone on values plus the company history. And then we do something that's provocative, but we also hold you accountable for the values. So for performance-based decisions, you get a rating right now, which we are doing away with, but we have to figure this piece out. You get a rating that's one rating on your performance from your impact, and then one on your values. Okay. So you actually can get, like, the top rewards only go to those people who do the best of both. And if you're really bad on values, but you're great on impact, you're not going to be with the company long. And that's how we work it.
Okay, can I just, while I have you, ask you about this alignment? You seem to talk about this cultural fit, and again, that's a phrase thrown around a lot in organizations. How do you screen for it? You seem very clear on being able to say somebody who fits, somebody who doesn't. Is that something that is apparent an hour after they've visited for the first time, or is it something you screen for before you ever even meet them?
Yeah, to be honest, it's tough. Yeah. Right. So we've been doing the screening for as long as about 2 years, and you try to get as behavioral as you can and get really crisp. You test your interview questions over the years, and you see which ones indicate a good signal. Right. You don't always get it right, so it's not 100%.
Of course.
But you got to be careful of saying fit. Like, it's not fit, because fit is just really that just gets into, is this person like me or not like me?
Of course.
Right. You try to look for behavior. So be authentic is one of our values. You look for opportunities or examples. Where have they been authentic? Where have they said the hard thing, either in school or in other companies? Or putting Pinners first is another value. So if you look at the person, how did you look at the customer aspect of something in a project? And you try to get as many behavioral points there. And the third is we try to do as many referrals as possible. So people who know our culture, who are culture carriers, they do the values assessment on people in the interviews. And they're also a lot of the people who are referring individuals, so we can make sure we're bringing people in who sort of match what we're looking for.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Claire, can we come back to you about my previous question before I went off on a tangent in respect to, does anybody remember what the question was at this point? No, I don't. I was specifically looking for where you ground values and how they crossed into cultural experience with onboarding informally or formally.
I mean, I think I'm going to repeat a lot of, so we have an onboarding process. We give people what we call a spin-up buddy. So we have a lot of peer-to-peer onboarding, and it's very important that we pick the right spin-up buddies, and those tend to be people who really get the culture and get the company, and they're meant to be sort of your Sherpa and your guide through your first month or so, and ask, and sort of somewhere that's safe to ask the questions and to check what's appropriate. And we found that it's more effective than having your manager do that, to have a peer do that. We have, the founders speak to the New Start classes about, I think this is the sort of founding story thing, and it's important, but also the mission and the values. We're actually working on a values-specific section of that onboarding. We give the cards to go to Blue Bottle Coffee and take walks or psych class, but I think a lot of the acculturation, we have an award we give at our all-hands meeting. So a lot of this is I think, similar. But we're working through some things like interview training and how you do behavioral interviewing and how you check for this. I think one of the pieces that we're starting to enter that phase, and I totally agree with you, it's like your last year of hiring is, are they carrying the culture, is how do you start to do things like choose who could be spin-up buddies, who are the best equipped to interview on values, we were so small and growing so fast. At one stage, it was like, sorry, everybody has got to do all of this. And now I think we're getting to the phase where we can start to be more selective and more intentional with our training on some of how do you look for this. During interviews, it's really easy for one of Stripe's values, this sort of humility and like roll up your sleeves and
Right.
do whatever's necessary value. And for those of you who ever interview, it's actually, if you've done thousands of interviews, which I think I have, especially if you were at Google in the early days, I think all I did was interview like 80 hours a week for the first 3 years. Anyway, there are people who can talk about their career and their accomplishments without bragging about it and without being arrogant about it or trying to sell themselves, and there are people who really can't. And so it's actually a really good filter in our first phone screens and our interviews is when you do that resume walk through what have I done, the people who do those phone screens are very good at saying, oh, you're not gonna, because someone who comes in and brags about personal accomplishments will not survive in the Stripe environment. And so it's actually, and it's too bad because I think some people just don't interview well, and that's too bad. But unfortunately, that's one of our biggest filters is confidence without arrogance.
Great. You've all spoken, and I'm rather surprised about the extent that leadership is involved in this onboarding, be it formal or informal. I mean, it's very high touch, it's high capacity, it's clearly resource intensive. You're all in that dangerous stage of growth. How does this scale? How do you keep having leadership contact or having that degree of cultural assimilation and not have, as you said, leadership spend their whole day, 80 hours a week as such, onboarding new people? Or have you even thought of that? Might be a better question. I hope you have. Yeah.
I mean, I think I'll probably echo a few other comments earlier, but during the interview process, I mean, the technical background, whatever function you're in, that's like table stakes to the interview process. Okay. But the cultural aspects of the role is so critical. And so those 4 core values that we have, we design questions to try to test for that. Because in order to scale, you want to make sure that you keep that fit as tight as possible. Mm-hmm. And we ask questions about teamwork. And if someone is talking about their resume and their background, it's all I versus my team or we, that won't work at Lyft because we have to be in it together, collaborating. So I think as far as hiring is so critical, no matter what stage of the company you're in, that I think leaders have to be a part of that process. But I think we're thoughtful that we want to spread, no matter what role you're interviewing for, we want you to meet with different types of individuals within the company so you have that different perspective. And I think that's the best way of trying to keep that at scale.
Yeah, thank you.
They're not going to meet everyone in the future, but we're going to hold on to it as long as we can, basically. I mean, I think where it scales, it's the next set of leaders. Mm-hmm. So maybe I start to do the founding story, even though I wasn't there. Yeah. But I can talk about the values and I can talk about the culture. And I think that's a piece that you have to get simultaneously right? Which is all of them, the scale hiring, but if you get the wrong leadership, especially at critical stages, you really have a hard time getting back from that. Yeah. And so I think we've been slow, frankly, as a company to hire leaders. But I think if you're going to be slow at something and cautious, like giving someone, they will end up just in the same way I said, founders, like the culture reflects the founders' values back to them in the beginning. Organizations, as they scale, it's like Olive, Stripes, customer operations, sales, and support is probably reflecting back my values a little bit right now. Because that's who they see more often, that's who they hear for more often. I better be aligned with Stripe or else we're going to start to see divergence in the company. And so I think there's a lot in leadership and the onboarding of leadership, and then how do you scale their way of connecting with the organization such that they are representing the company. And I think where companies go wrong is that divergence.
So you see the next stage as quite organic, quite natural, but rooted somewhat in values, but recognizing that there'll be a certain loss of control with the small c. It's not going to be bedlam, but you're still going to have a change as such in the degree of contact that leaders will have with people.
Yeah, I think we're only humans.
Yes.
I feel like that's the hardest thing. I mean, when I ran an organization of a couple thousand people at Google, I recorded video messages and sent them out to the whole team because I realized it felt awkward. I'm in my office with my assistant with a camera, and I was like, but this is me trying to talk to people, in this case, in 16 different countries, and connect with them, and read like a really long email is not that effective at that. And then so I can't have a one-to-one conversation with you, but I'm going to figure out my best approximation of that. And I think this is what social media represents for a lot of us, maybe in our personal lives, but like there are versions of that in companies that hopefully don't feel too corporate, that feel real, that feel like this is someone trying to talk to me, and we'll have to all figure those out as we get bigger and bigger. I mean, I kind of enjoy being the size that Stripe is now, but I'm also in charge of thinking about how big we're going to be next year, and we're going to be a lot bigger, and so I think about this, and I feel like I'm not rushing to get to those stages. I'm trying to get us there thoughtfully.
Great, thank you very much.
Just two quick things.
Sure, work away, yep.
I think I agree with everything that Claire and Ron were saying. I think the areas where I always look for in the senior leaders is where can they get leverage? Because there's only so many opportunities they have to reach a large swath of the organization. And Ben has just chosen that the new hire class every week or every 2 weeks, that's one where he's going to invest so that they see him. And now that we're 750 people, he doesn't know everyone remotely, right? So that was really hard for him to get over. So that one, and then weekly Q&A is a way for him to get leverage. And the time that he spends, he gets a lot of interface with people. The second suggestion I'd have is just write it down. Right. So
shocking idea.
When people start on day one, it sounds like Ron, you guys may do this, but Claire, you may too. But write down your values. Write down what your culture is about. So we wrote a doc called Culture at Pinterest, and we found just writing it down and then scaling that for people who are interviewing, scaling that for people who start. Like, here's the things we believe in, and when they can't see Ben or they can't get to the entire company, these are things that they can look at and they can digest, and it's really super scalable, and you can iterate and keep going on it.
Okay. It's interesting to hear culture being spoken about with such a sense of activity, that it's not something that'll happen as a byproduct, but clearly there's a trade-off where you recognize there's a strong enough return from these cultural investments on seeing the right people in the right jobs, the right organization.
There is a lot of intentional stuff you can do on culture building, but I always tell my teams, especially people I'm developing as managers, that leading organizations is a lot like parenting. It is not what you say, it is what you do. It is what you do with your time, where you spend your time, who you spend your time with, and that is actually where culture is coming from in most companies. So just want to clarify that.
That was said in a parental voice. It has to be noted as well. That did sound.
No, my kids, they're watching, and it's just, are you walking the walk? Because you can talk a lot of talk, but if Ben doesn't show up at that new start class and says, oh, it's really important that I meet every new Pinterest, what do you guys call yourselves?
Team.
We're stripes. We're stripes. But I think if you say that and then you don't do it, you just totally undermined everything you tried to build with your people team. I don't know.
No, you're absolutely right, because John is the primary person here, and he's been traveling quite a bit. So when he misses a class, he makes an effort to try to get those people together to make it up. So it's so critical.
Right. In touching on things like growth and so on, I was really struck by what you said in respect to the danger of starting to attract and hire and recruit people who are just like you. And of course, it's a very easy fallacy to fall into because it's comfortable, it's similar, and it's probably quite efficient. How do you treat diversity in all senses of the term as you grow? What value does diversity, not just on a technical skill bring, but on an experiential skill to the organizations you're trying to build?
So for us, the way we define diversity at Pinterest is anything that gives you a unique perspective. So it could be your economic background. It could be where you grew up. It could be your family situation. It could be something that codes like gender. It could be your race and ethnicity. It's much broader. And for us, Pinterest is really based on creativity. That's what our product is about. And the more diversity we have, the more creative we think our product is. And that's a very fundamental principle we've got. So we do a lot of outreach to try to get better in diversity in general. And when we rolled out a values-based, like behavioral interviews, and we also assess for qualities, like certain types of qualities, we've been really cautious with managers to manage unconscious bias.
Okay, great.
So everyone in the company has gone through unconscious bias. People heard what unconscious bias is. So it's essentially, we all have unconscious biases that are like within us. You can't get rid of them. All you can do is mitigate them. And we do training for everyone to say, at hiring, at promo decisions, at performance decisions, really check yourself and think through how are you making them, and are you hiring someone or making these decisions based on how they look? Do they look different from you, or any perceptions you have that are not based on performance, right? So you have to be very intentional on it. And we set goals for diversity to try to push ourselves to get a little bit, to be more provocative.
Okay.
And so now we're looking at very different channels. And one of the things we've done with hiring managers and the leadership has pushed out is you are not going to hire everyone from the Googles, the Facebooks, who come from your school or from your background, because those people are in a lot of different places. They're in a lot of different companies. And when we source from all those different places. And we've had to coach managers to say, now you're gonna start to think differently, and you're not gonna look for a profile that just looks like yours.
Okay.
And you have to continue to hone on that, because left to its devices, managers will hire people who look like them.
Absolutely.
There you go. I think you made a great point too. The way we view diversity is diversity of thought, diversity of background, all different types of ways. If you look at our platform, 60% of our passengers are females. 50% of our drivers identify with ethnic diversity. So in order for us to really speak to that, we have to build products that can apply to all those diverse passengers and drivers. So we have to have diversity of thought, diversity in terms of our interview process. We're a little bit behind where Michael is. We are going to be doing unconscious bias training, but I think because we have built a community of drivers and we're very connected with the drivers and passengers, that we've been more open to that type of process during the interviews. So I think we've done a great job so far, but we have to be more intentional about things. One example though recently that has really helped us, we announced a few weeks ago that we moved our customer service center to Nashville. And what better way to help our passengers and drivers than trying to reach out to our community to see and get that diverse mindset and thought into our into Lyft. So of our first 8 hires, 5 have been Lyft drivers, and Lyft drivers from various backgrounds. So that perspective coming into the organization will help us better serve our passengers and drivers.
Great, thank you.
We're behind on some of this, but I actually, one of our values is require respect and inclusion. And it, again, is already in the company. I'm actually very proud of where Stripe already is organically and sort of having incredibly diverse. We also have a lot of remote employees, and that's enabled us to pull from talent pools that it's just harder in Silicon Valley sometimes. But when I look at our all hands meeting, I'm like, wow, this is great. We're doing really great. Though the employees are never happy. They were like, we want more diversity. And what I've tried to say to people, when I started, I was the first woman on the executive team, which was pretty small, so that's fine. I think there was an expectation that I was going to come in and be some kind of champion on either gender issues or diversity. And I have found that many organizations do diversity programs and have diversity teams that essentially marginalize the whole topic. And often the people who staff those programs and teams are underrepresented populations.
Yes.
So it's like, why don't you go solve your problem over on the side, running trainings for people or trying to have events or whatever. So I've been very adamant that we not try small initiatives as a company that seem marginal on this topic. I was like, we're all going to do it, or none of us are going to do it. I may be a little strident at this point on this topic, I apologize, but it's not one individual's problem, right? It is unconscious bias, it's all of us. It's sort of how do you have equal share of work at home between men and women, or caregivers? It's both of their problem, right? And I think that we need a little bit of a different dialogue. I find it concerning, and some of the companies are this whole I'm going to publish my statistics is great, but what are you doing about it as a whole company? And that's what concerns me, is that we've turned this into some kind of PR topic when it is a really fundamental root change in how organizations and systems are built that is needed. So I think it's a marginal, I was like.
Something we're in our last 5 minutes, so you can either breathe a sigh of relief or of joy, whichever it is. But one of the things I really wanted to touch on is there's been a lot made around how employees choose organizations on the basis of culture. So it's very easy to think of this as one directional, that you're bringing people into your culture. Well, employees have a tremendous amount of opportunity these days. And a huge part of how they make choices about culture is principally on this classical work-life balance. How do your respective organizations and of course I knew somebody would hand this away as instantly as well. How do you characterize work-life balance as part of your culture? Is it ingrained? Knowing, and I say this with a caveat, that you're in that critical stage where work is everything and hours are long, is it a conversation? Is it a cultural issue? Do you want to change the topic?
Well, I mean, I think we're very community focused. We're very mission driven. So people who are here are very passionate about what we do, prideful. So they want to be a part of it. They want to work probably more than others just because they enjoy what they're doing. So I mean, I think the when and how that people work, we don't really care.
Okay.
So they can develop what that looks like. But the thing is everyone has results that we have to hold them to. So as long as they get the results done, it should be fine.
Okay.
So that's how we view it. But what we think is because we create an environment that people want to be a part of, that they want to help develop and nurture, that we feel that will sort itself out.
Great, thank you.
Yes. So what I usually talk about is work-life flexibility.
Okay.
Because honestly, it's a startup. So just to keep it real, there are peaks and valleys, and there's times where you don't feel like you have a balance because you're running really fast, you have few resources, and someone is like on your heels to take your market. So I would never tell a candidate that there's not going to be peaks where you're working hard. What we do is we have sort of a sprint rests principle. So there may be a couple of months where you are going really hard, and then there's a month where there's a lull, and people are expected to leave early and just chill and rejuvenate. I think people who go in, they need to understand that we're going to give you tools to be flexible. And there's a lot of people who leave at 5:30 because they want to be home. Me personally, I want to be home with my daughter and feed her dinner, and then I'm going to get back on later and finish things up. And there's people who schedule their work around situations like that. But in a startup environment, I think you have to expect that you're going to be working pretty hard, and then hopefully you have the situation where you have support and there are those lull periods.
Great.
I think there are companies that have expectations that I think they earn reputations as being not a great work-life balance company. I think every startup is definitely people are working hard. I mean, Stripe is also very mission-driven. I know it's a payments company, how does that have a mission? But if you think about it, there's a fundamental sort of economic access question. When you can't start a company in certain parts of the world, actually you can't even start it because there will be no bank that will support you, but then you can't sell to people in another country because of the banking system. Like, that is wrong. Like, there is economic access that is sort of broken globally, and people at Stripe are very committed to fixing that problem. And frankly, my problem as a leader is more sending them home, and because you're also dealing with payments. And so if things go wrong or your users need you, this is their whole business. This is their whole income. This could bring them down. So there's like a very heavy pressure that the company puts on people that we don't, right? We say work-life flexibility. There's a lot of flexibility on hours. We have a lot of remote employees. There's not a lot of FaceTime in the office. When I joined, I sent a note to Patrick for my own purposes, and I said, these are the hours that I will be in the office. Okay. And these are the vacations I'll be taking. And if that isn't acceptable, I won't join. Because I just can't give up certain things, and I won't. And he was like, that's fine. And when I got to Stripe, I was like, yeah, it is fine. It's actually, and I think I set an example because I leave every day at a pretty reasonable time. I usually stay late one night. You guys are getting my stay late night. Don't tell the people at Stripe. But I sort of try to set a consistent schedule about what I do that helps me be balanced. I also put that I have workouts on my calendar because I'm trying to set an example that, like, if I don't exercise a couple times a week, I will not feel good as a human, and then I will not be good at work as a human. But I really struggle more with the overcommitment and the people who are like sprinting, and not doing the resting. And I think the best thing we can do is try not to set a culture that expects certain things because they're putting it on themselves. And then we also, as leaders, can try to set a good example. But my career has already been pretty long, and I haven't gotten a lot of breaks. And I somehow have managed it. And I hope other people figure out that it's possible.
Great.
But this bubble place we live in too, it's really bizarre, super bizarre. So I mean, if we can all just try to be normal people and explain, we have needs, and I try to be vulnerable to people at Stripe about, oh, my daughter is like sick and I was up all night and that's why I'm grumpy today, right? Because like that's what you have to bring. That's being authentic also, is
absolutely.
just being balanced in how you present yourself.
Brilliant. Well, I'm very, very conscious of time, much to some people's relief, I'm sure. But we also want to open up some of these questions and the opportunity to ask questions to the audience. So I'll hand that over to moderation at that point, but we'll come back as a conclusion at the end.
You're going to run around with the mic?
You want to take these? Yeah.
Sure.
Sure, and relinquish.
We'll keep the mic up here. Is there any other questions?
You talked about promoting culture in a company that has started small and you've codified the culture. Have you ever been in a company or in an organization where the culture was not what you wanted it to be? You needed to change it. And I know you're going to say you model the behavior, and that's not the easy part, but that's the straightforward part. What other things can you do as a leader to cause the culture of an organization to go from here to here?
So a culture, I think Neil mentioned this before, it doesn't have to be this cryptic thing. There's certain levers that you can pull to drive culture. It's who you hire, it's how you reward, it's who you put in leadership roles, to Claire's point, what they do. And if you say, this is where we want to be 18 months from now, we're not there, it's aspirational. Like when we built culture at Pinterest, we're about 30% of the way there. So we were really honest with our team. This is where we want to go. The way you build it is you say either ground up, or you say, I want, like for you as your team, your employees, what is the culture you want for leaders, for the way we hire, for the way we reward? Or you do it top down. Like founders say, this is the type of things we want to see, and this is what we think is going to make the business successful. And then everything you do around the people agenda, you tie back to those things. So what are those behaviors you're trying to drive? And you just chip away at it. Like you won't change it overnight. So everything you launch, it should be towards that North Star. And that's how I would do it.
But I think if your question was as a leader, so I would say if you are the leader, and I, under my breath, said I would watch what Satya Nadella is doing at Microsoft, because that is a hard culture change job, but that guy's going after it. And he restructured, he changed the leadership team, he moved a lot of people out. I think there's very significant changes that happened very quickly at that company, and I think it's worth watching. If you are a leader, though, and you're in a company culture that you think should change, but you are not the leader, and they are not on board with it, you have a problem. So one of the things I always think about is my values overlap with the company that I'm in values. And they're never going to be perfectly aligned, unless it's my company, I guess. But at Google, for a long time, it was right there. It was great. I mean, there was a lot of impact in that company, a lot of mission in that company, a lot of things I cared about. But there was a piece that started to creep away that, I think about, in fact, people topics very differently than some of the ways that Google thinks about them. And it started to be hard to be a leader in that. I could build a culture in my own org that was a little bit more reflective of what I thought made sense, but that's frankly not good for Google if you get too far away from what Google was trying to be. So I do sometimes think you face a decision for yourself about your value alignment and whether you can live it and be authentic as a leader. So I guess I would change, depends on what position you're in that and how I would answer that question.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Each of you came from tremendous companies that were all pretty stable and obviously great positions. What made you decide to take a bigger risk? With some of these companies 2-3 years ago, a lot of people didn't know a lot of what these companies did.
Sure. So before I was at Lyft, I was at Facebook. I joined, it was 1,700, it was about a year and a half before the IPO. And now there are probably 10,000 plus. So, I had great impact there, but Facebook would have been great with or without me. One of my recruiters at Facebook was a friend of Logan here at Lyft, and he was looking for someone who can help with his explosive growth that they were about to have. So, what made the decision for me to come here was the founders are very authentic, very humble. It was their first gig, and they wanted to surround themselves with, leadership. Also, the impact coming in at 80 people, building the company from the ground up. I mean, Lyft would not be at the stage that they're at without the impact that we've had as a people team. And then also, being at Facebook, connecting people through the web was a passion of mine. Here, we're connecting people through transportation. So all those three things aligned, and that really sold me on coming here.
Thank you.
I answer this question every time I interview someone, but my answer is long, so I'm going to do the shortest version I can. So the first is actually the values of the founders and who they were as people and what I thought their vision was for what the company could be, and did I want to get behind that for the reason that I answered that question. It has very important to me personally to be very aligned. The company had to have mission in it because I'm not really around it's great. There's great companies out there that are doing entertaining things or things that might make you a quick buck, but I want to be part of something that is actually impacting the world. And solving big problems. And so the macro trend and the industry was important to me to a point, as long as people's lives, and in the case for me, I really care a lot about economic development, had to be a product that I thought I could tie directly to economic development, to people who didn't have opportunities. And then it came down to the culture that was already there, that I was sensing in my interview process when I visited the office, the role that I could play in building from where the company was, and feeling self-aware about where could I add value to this, where am I going to learn, because I want to learn, I want to grow as a leader. But frankly, you can get really comfy in a big, stable place that overpays you. But you're not learning at the same rate, and you're not really being your best self. And after a while, it's really hard to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, is this what I have to offer? And I think every sort of year or so, it's good to look yourself in that mirror and decide, am I in the place that I'm having the biggest impact given what I care about in the world? And I walked into Stripe thinking that, I could just burn up, like this thing may not work. Or I can feel like really proud of something I helped build. And I hope it's the latter. It's still 1 year in, but it's like a risk. There's points in your life you got to just take those risks. And them in my gut, I just felt it, unlike other companies had recruited me. And I think that's the other thing. Be picky about when you take those risks, because it's a lot of yourself that you're giving. But it's really exciting. It's fun.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
So I had a very similar experience to Claire, so I'll leave my last 2/3. I pretty much went through the same thing from Google, because you're very comfy there, right? And I felt like I was 60% engaged. Like I did not feel like I was doing my career's best work, and I didn't see any path to do my career's best work there. So that was one thing that got me to start looking and being open. And the second one was I really wanted to build a company. And you don't get to do that when you're in a big company. Like it's very rare that you have to be at the super top of the organization, or you just have to found it. And Larry and Sergey built the company. I was never going to build a company. And I was also picky, and I wanted to find a place where I felt like they valued the people function, and that the CEO had someone on his team who he could use as a trusted advisor. And fortunately, Ben's married to a people person, an HR person, so he got the function, and he understood the importance of culture and how that can drive a company. And then everyone on the leadership team I met, super humble, all of them in their first time in the top job. So we were all going through the same learning curve, and I just felt like this was a perfect fit. And I was praying that I got the job. And after I met with Ben, if you've ever met him, he's very hard to read. And I thought I killed it in the first 2 rounds with everyone except Ben, and actually called the search person. I was like, man, I absolutely crapped it. She's like, what are you talking about? Like, he hated me. And then she's like, well, let's just get feedback and let's see what it's like, and then we'll look at the next one. And she's no, he loved you. And I'm like, I should lose my HR license because I could not read that guy. So that's what you should wait for. You should wait for, if you're in that comfy situation and if you're in a good brand company, wait for the one that just feels so right.
We have a question over here.
Yeah, please.
So exciting. I have a lot of questions, but I'll try to make it short or a long one question. Essentially, it comes down to how could you challenge people, both as individuals in their companies and also leaders. Obviously, we know that culture is so important and all these things, but how are people actually investing in it, and how are they making it real and living it? I'd just be really curious to hear, like, what's a challenge that you would give to individuals and to leaders to make a change?
To make a culture? I need to clarify the culture. What's a challenge when you're trying to test them on living the culture?
What's a challenge that, so I guess my question really comes from, I mean, culture is one of the top 3 things that leaders know is important in an organization. I mean, Deloitte's Human Capital Study said it's the #1 thing, Deloitte's Human Capital Research Study, but it's the #1 culture and engagement, the most important thing. But when you see some organizations are investing in it, like yours clearly are, you have great people programs that's important to you. Some organizations are either, this is new to them, or they just don't know how to go about it. So I guess from a leader standpoint, how would you challenge leaders who are thinking about investing in culture? How would you challenge them to go forward with that? Because that's a risky thing, right? If there's something wrong, they have to admit there's something wrong. If they're just starting out, it's new. And then I guess, just as individuals as well, how can you empower us to challenge our leaders to make those cultural changes? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I could take a first pass and then
Yeah.
love to get your thoughts. If you do culture surveys or you do something where you're getting feedback from individuals in the company, it's an easy way to say, all right, here's our feedback on what's working, what's not working with the culture. And to the extent a company can put those out, you're already creating a safe space for people to raise their hand and say, in an anonymous way, here's the things we think we'd love to work on. We have a culture club, and a lot of companies I know start culture clubs. And those are people who really care about the organization and they want to get involved and do things that help forward the culture. So that's a good groundswell for folks. A lot of times they tap into what the engagement surveys say, or they just do things that they know are cool that the company loves, and they're sort of accretive to the broader culture. And that can also be a safer way for people to do it as part of a group instead of just one person raising her hand and saying, hey, I think we need to make these changes.
I mean, we're doing similar things to what you just mentioned. I think the other piece of it is you try to educate the leaders who don't, have a sense of how important culture is. I mean, you can build the best product, have the best roadmap, have the best operations, but if you don't take into consideration, people and their investment and their engagement, it doesn't matter how great the product is, you will not succeed. So I think you have to try to frame it in that way. I mean, we've done surveys. We just recently applied for the Great Place to Work company. We did not make it, but we learned a lot from it. And if we focus on that as a company and each leader owns that, I think we can build a better culture and empower people.
I think we have time for another question. Yeah.
I have a question for Ron specifically. Even though your drivers are independent contractors, they're probably the biggest representation of your culture and your brand externally. How do you manage that?
So we have teams that focus on driver education, driver quality, because what we want to do is make sure that our experience is what separates us from our competition. I mean, in our market, it's very fierce war on price and ETA, so it's the community and the experience that differentiates us. The other piece, drivers we feel are definitely a part of our community, and we treat them as people, and they are motivated to work with us and be a part of our environment. So we focus on making sure drivers are happy, we provide drivers with all the support that they need, and they respond and provide that experience to our passengers.
I'm afraid we could talk all night, but rather ironically, I'm going to ask a final question to bring things to a close, please. It'd be a complete waste of an opportunity to have representation from 3 such exciting companies at such an exciting time in such an exciting place in the world. Can you briefly tell us about what's next? What's happening next?
In the company?
Yes, yeah.
A lot.
And preferably stock related in the future or value driven, portfolio.
Stock related, yeah.
It's being recorded.
Of course, yeah.
Being recorded, yeah.
So you're talking about product strategy?
No,
or-
I'm looking at from a cultural point of view. You're
Cultural
about to
point
go
of
through
view.
astonishing
Yeah.
growth. You all are.
Yeah.
What's the future looking like?
Yeah, so we're continuing to double down on diversity because I think we're behind just like everyone in Silicon Valley is, and we think when you're small, the best chance to get in front of that and correct it is now.
Okay.
If you are Google size, to move 1 percentage point, you've lost. Like it's way too hard.
Mm-hmm.
So because diversity is so important for our creativity, we're focusing on that a lot. And we're focusing on international growth.
Okay.
So a lot of that for culture comes back to how do you export a culture overseas to other offices? Do you send your best people out there and they build the office up? Do you hire locally? all those decisions we're going through right now, and they have huge cultural implications.
Okay, thank you. Claire?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we're scaling simultaneously in several markets, actually, from like a fairly small place, and doing that at the same time is actually a chance to do things thinking globally from the beginning. So we're trying to build, I'm working to build much more of that into how we engage employees and how we all communicate around the world. I think we're in this sort of doubling the company stage every year or next year again. And so there's a lot of infrastructure to be built for how do we scale some of our interviewing, onboarding. And then I think a big investment for next year is actually going to be learning and development and more formal programs for people. Because we also have some employees who've been around a few years, and we have some managers who I think could use a lot more investment on that. So balancing between that really rapid scale and the sort of, it's almost like a monetary investment, putting some money back, is going to be, I think, a critical thing for us to figure out for next year. But it's, the forecast is growth.
Great.
I think we're in the same mode. I mean, we're rolling out in our top 15 markets. So communications, values, how do you create that culture in distributed offices is key for us this next year. Also, doubling down on learning and development and helping grow and engage all of our team members. And diversity is also top of our list of how can we expand upon that and be more intentional about it.
Great. If I can. I think I'm going to have to draw it to a close. I'm sorry, like all good conversations, we should bring them before it all goes sour for some reason. But I wanted to finish by saying thank you, first of all, to Lyft, our kind and gracious host tonight, and to Lonnie, wherever she is, thank you so much. To University of San Francisco, Susan Yunes and Michelle and her team, thank you so much. But specifically to our panelists tonight, to Ron, to Claire, and of course to Michael, thank you so much for your insights tonight.